I am a large person, and I also really like street photography, and these two things present a very unique issue for me, which is that when you're doing street photography, you want people to not really notice you. You don't want them necessarily to look at the camera all the time. You want to capture what is going on around you in the street. And when you're a larger person and you shove a camera in your face looking directly at someone, people tend to notice, people tend to look at you. And this is, something I've dealt with for a really long time because, well, I like to use a pretty unique looking camera. I would say I like my X-T1. I find it to be a delightful experience. But what happens is people look at me too much. And my street photography, I think, has suffered because of this. Now, what do you do in this situation? Do you accept it? Do you try to be more inconspicuous? Do you use longer lenses? Well, I don't think so. In my opinion, I think you should go the other way. This is my NEX 5R. This is probably my favorite camera to use for street photography. And I know what you might be thinking. I'm a large person, my hands are pretty big. Is this really uncomfortable to use? Is it worth it ergonomically for the trade-off? In my opinion, yes, because, well, you're not using it like a traditional camera. This is something I really miss about this type of camera and what I think we should be kind of trying to strive for, which is interesting camera designs that are sort of futuristic as opposed to moving backwards. Now, I always really like a good retro camera, that's why I use my X-T1 all the time, but I gotta say, the ergonomic design of this camera is really conducive to street photography. So let me explain. The key to this camera is that there is no viewfinder at all. There is no way of checking your image aside from using the screen. This is perfectly normal, I think, for compact cameras. So again, it's not really something special. But what I do find special is how it's designed to let you shoot from the hip. So effectively, all you're doing is holding it like this at hip level. So just imagine this is my hip right here, looking down at the flip up screen and simply adjusting the dials with your thumb. So you have the top dial, you have the back dial right here, and that's pretty much it. And if you want to change your ISO, you can of course just click on the side dial and then adjust it from there. It's super intuitive, super quick, and probably my fastest shooting camera. I think I get the highest amount of hit rate, I think, just from using this thing on the street. And a little bit of that is from mainly me using it for so long. This is actually my first camera. This is the camera that I've learned how to shoot photography on. And I think it's a little bit surprising to people because it doesn't really look like a professional level camera, if that makes sense. It doesn't look like a giant bulky DSLR. It doesn't look like anything you could do serious work on, except it's perfectly capable. And in my opinion, actually in some ways better than my X-T1. The biggest advantage of this camera, of course, is the size. So let's put on a smaller lens so I can really show you how tiny this thing is. This is currently with the 16mm Sony lens. I find it to be okay. I'm not a huge fan, but this is just sort of to illustrate how tiny it can be with a pancake lens. And that kind of brings me to my second point about this thing, which is that, well, it's an E-mount camera, which means that you can pretty much fit any single type of lens you want on this thing. E-mount is incredibly prolific, and what I've noticed with this is that it tends to adapt vintage lenses really, really well. So if you're the type of guy who likes to go in the thrift stores, check underneath the little glass cabinet, whatever, look at whatever kind of vintage lens they have, this is perfect for you. All you have to do is get an adapter and, well, it has a lot of really good features for focusing manual lenses that I think people kind of disregard. So if you're the kind of guy who wants a camera that's sort of like a platform for the lens and pretty much nothing else, this is really good. Another key feature of this camera is its ability to ask you to subscribe to my channel. I'm so sorry, I have to do this. I really appreciate you guys watching. But again, subscribing really helps out this channel, and I put out videos every single Thursday, so. Okay, sorry, I'll go back. With no viewfinder, you do want to be able to confidently focus on your subject. And I'm pleased to say that this is a very easy camera to focus, at least in my experience. It uses phase detect autofocus, and if you're using a manual lens, like I do a lot of the time with this thing, it offers pretty good focus peaking, as well as a nice punch-in feature that you can just assign to a button. So if you want to just really quickly punch in, you just tap it, adjust, and that's it. And of course, if you just manually focus on a electronic lens like this one, it'll automatically detect that and punch in for you. Again, super handy, and it lets me focus really, really quickly, even on lenses that aren't exactly linear and are just focused by wire. If you want to use it to record video, I won't say that it's perfect, but what is really nice about it is that one, it takes 1080p 60, which is really good for an older camera like this, and it has this nice little flip up screen, right? So you can flip it all the way down or all the way up if you want to take selfies, or maybe even just a little bit of video. I've used it to actually record video on my San Francisco trip, which, you know, I've been showing throughout this entire video. I pretty much only brought this camera here. I had my phone, this camera, and some extra batteries, and I was only using the 18 to 55 millimeter kit lens. And while that's not my favorite lens, it is incredibly light for what it is. So it worked out perfectly. All of these pictures that I'm showing have come straight from San Francisco for that trip, and honestly, it was probably my favorite trip that I've ever taken a camera on. There's a couple downsides to this thing. It does not have a hot shoe. Instead, it has this weird proprietary like link mount. I'll show you right here. Most cameras I've seen for sale usually come with the flash, and it just screws in, slots in, and now you have a flash. The nice thing about it is removable. The only issue is if you do have it, you can't exactly flip up your screen all the way. Again, not a huge issue. When you're waist level shooting, it's never been a problem for me. But just something to keep in mind. You are not going to be able to really mount external flashes to this thing unless you're using the Sony flashes. There are adapters I've seen on like eBay and Amazon stuff, and apparently they work. Again, I've never been interested in using them because, I mean, look at this thing. I'm using this mainly for inobtrusive street photography and a lot of architecture stuff as well. So it's never come up. In addition, if you're using heavier lenses, the ergonomics of it get a little weird. So let me show you. So this is a TT Artisan's 50mm 1.2 lens, which I got because I was trying to improve my portraits as well as my more focused street photography. I love it, by the way. It was super cheap and it performs really, really well, especially on this camera. The one issue I have with it is that it is noticeably heavier than the entire camera. So I tend to have to kind of be a little more considerate of the camera size when I'm doing that. But again, as a manual focus lens, it works out perfectly with what this camera is able to do with that punch in, the focus peaking, all that kind of stuff. But just keep that in mind. It is a very, very light camera. In terms of build quality, I would consider it to be very well built for what it is. Again, I got this for very cheap, so I'm not exactly, you know, holding it up to an incredibly high standard. But the grip is, while small, definitely well textured. And I find that the dials are in a pretty acceptable spot. I'm not going to complain about it. Of course, you do have a tripod there at the bottom, so you can mount it on a tripod or whatever you want if you do want more stability, because this camera does not offer in-body stabilization. You can get in-lens stabilization pretty easily on E-mount. It's not something that they're lacking. There's so many lenses now that, again, like, I don't really find it a big deal, but it is something to consider. So with decent video, honestly, for today, with really good image quality, especially with this 16 megapixel sensor, with really good adaptability for vintage lenses, older lenses that you want to use, and just the general inobtrusiveness of how you hold it and the size, I consider this to be my favorite street photography camera. It is an older camera, so there are some downsides with that. A lot of the apps that you could use with your phone are kind of depreciated. You can't really get them anymore, but I think overall, it's just such a good package for what it is. Sony sells a lot of smaller sized APS-C cameras now, like the A5100, the A6000 series. I think they have the A6700 right now, which is, you know, crazy. But I think as the tiers go up and as they sell more and more of these cameras, they get slowly bigger and bigger. They lose on that key advantage, which was that this thing's tiny. This thing is ridiculously tiny. And I think if you're okay with not having a viewfinder, which you can get on the NEX6, by the way, this is one of the best inobtrusive city street photography cameras you can get. And honestly, for a lot of other things, it works really well too. So I would highly recommend getting this camera if you're interested in a cheaper alternative to, you know, something more expensive that has a flip up screen like this, and you want to have fun, because this thing just provides me a lot of fun. It makes shooting really, really fun, and it becomes sort of a, I don't know, it's a fun gimmick. That's all I'll say right now. Yeah, if you like this video, you know, of course, leave a like if you really did enjoy this video. Leave a comment if you guys enjoyed. Do you guys think that camera companies should be moving more towards, you know, weirder designs like this? I think so. I honestly think so. I know that the retro style is in vogue right now with the X100 series. Fujifilm just in general. Like, everyone loves these things. The ZFs and the Nikons, everything, top mounted dials, very deliberate styles of shooting. But I really like just how functional this is for what it is. And I hope that it comes back. I really do. So yeah, thank you. All right, I'll see you next Thursday.